Hi, I'm Janelle Ralph. I'm the Executive Director of Compassionate South Carolina, also known as CSC.Health. We're still in Columbia. We're running through some of these interviews. And actually Judy's here with me. She is what I would like to call my Vice President, or someday hopefully my President, so I don't have to do this. And also mollyLeier, and Molly is actually one of our Regional Directors of Outreach. She has been with us now for a couple years. Yeah. And Molly just does amazing things, advocacy work, so I'll go ahead and let Judy speak.
Thank you for joining us, Molly.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Janelle.
So Molly, can you tell us a little bit of your background as far as being in the medical field?
Sure. So my background, I studied biochemistry and molecular biology in college, and I've had a long love of things that happen in the body at the cellular level. And how I got involved in cannabis, which I never thought was an area I would be involved in, is in looking how to treat an aging cat. From doing that, I learned about the endocannabinoid system that all mammals have. In fact, all vertebrates have this endocannabinoid system. And it's not studied a lot. A lot of doctors don't know a lot about it. It made perfect sense to me. And when I saw that we could supplement this system in our body if it became deficient by a plant that was given to us by God, just the light came on, and I decided I needed to go share this information with as many people as possible. So that's how I became involved. Love of science, and that most people didn't know about this.
Yep. And I think, we all came to it. I came to it for my child. Judy came to it for her children. And I think after you realize what this plant is, and you start delving into the research, and you understand what the endocannabinoid system is, which I'll kind of give you a brief, actually I'll let you give like a brief introduction of what it is. Well, okay, I can do it. So basically you have these receptors throughout your body, and they work very much like your central nervous system. And we call them the endocannabinoid system, and they're in very key areas in your body and in your brain. So you have CB1 receptors mostly concentrated in your brain, CB2 receptors concentrated throughout your body. So your body actually produces endocannabinoids, and those endocannabinoids actually mimic phytocannabinoids that are made in the cannabis plant. So the cannabis plant is one of the only plants that produce a mass amount of these phytocannabinoids that your body is already producing. Well, over the years, back before 1930, cannabis was actually a go-to treatment in the pharmacopoeia for almost any type of an inflammation disorder, neurological conditions. There was huge studies in the 40s about how cannabis treats epilepsy, which now we're getting back into seeing. You guys are probably seeing a lot of this in the news. A lot of these kids having hundreds of seizures using cannabis, and the seizures are subsiding or going away or being treated. So we know that cannabis is medicine. We used to use it as a go-to medicine for all different types of disorders. And now we've just gotten so far away from it that our bodies are actually cannabinoid deficient. So right now what's happening is our natural body's endocannabinoids that they're normally should be producing, that we used to substitute in cannabinoids through hemp or marijuana, now we've taken the substitute out and our body can't produce enough. So what's happening is our bodies are completely out of homeostasis. So when we add these cannabinoids back in, what it does is it triggers and reacts that endocannabinoid system, and it makes it perform optimally. And by doing that, it creates homeostasis back for our body. And that's why you hear all of these different conditions that people anecdotally talk about. They're in legal states and they're using cannabis for, and they're having all of these results and relief for. And that's because that system is so important throughout your body. And so that's kind of why we do what we do. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so some people have this assumption that cannabis is not medicine, when in reality, it's probably the most powerful medicine that there is. And we've seen it over and over again. We've seen it through research studies. We've seen it through studies going on in Israel where it's never been illegal and they can do human trials over there. And so we just we really want people to be empowered on finding out the truth and finding the answers around this plant and why was it so demonized, I can say one word, Harry Anslinger. You may want to go ahead and look that up. he was a very interesting man, not. He had some very novel ideas, and at the end of the day, you know, this plant was removed out of our society for simply racist reasons, and it's just unfortunate that this has happened, and it's also unfortunate that we have not actually been able to bring it back in. So the other name I would research if you're researching marijuana: Harry Anslinger, Richard Nixon. And those are really the tiers that you can look at and see where we are now with this and why we have to fight so hard to see a naturally occurring substance in a plant, naturally occurring in our body, that has never killed anybody, that we know treats several conditions. So.
Gotcha. You're absolutely right. I mean, the endocannabinoid receptors in the body are more vast and widespread than any other neurotransmitter receptor that we have in our body. So throughout our brain, throughout our central nervous system, on all of our organs, in our bones, this is the way these receptors and the ligands that bind to these receptors are endocannabinoids that we're supposed to make, or phytocannabinoids that we can supplement with if we do become deficient, are so important. They're involved in all aspects of our physiology. This system is responsible for helping us regulate our mood, our metabolism, our pain, our inflammation, anything that could go wrong in our body and pull us out of balance or out of homeostasis. This system is designed to be put in place as a check to help bring us back into balance once we have gotten out of balance. So in the past, like you said, before the early 1940s, cannabis was a big part of the US pharmacopoeia. It was all of the drug manufacturers that were around during that time had a cannabis tincture, and you use that for all sorts of things. We didn't, see a lot of the health issues that we see today because we had a way to supplement something that is, could potentially become deficient. So,
absolutely. So why? Tell us some of the stuff that brought you. What we know about your cat and how, how you started researching. I know for me, when I started researching for Harmony, it was so eye-opening, and I was just so shocked because if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I would have ever given my child cannabis, any form of cannabis, or if I would even be sitting in this seat advocating for cannabis, I would have looked at you like you had two heads, because there was no way I was doing that.
Yeah.
But after, we ran out of options and people started saying, well, this is an option, and so I started delving into this. I realized that there's so much that I didn't know. And honestly, you kind of go through a phase, or at least I did, of, education, acceptance, then real anger. And then what the hell, now I gotta get involved.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the thing that I think all advocates kind of transpire after they reach that education and realize for so many years all this propaganda was out there to manipulate us, and it just was false. So that's
basically, kind of the route that I took. To people who say that this hasn't been researched, potentially it hasn't been researched at the clinical level, but it has been researched at the basic science level. If you go to PubMed, which is a database that warehouses all of the peer-reviewed white papers in science out there, you can find over 20,000 studies on cannabis. It has been researched. It hasn't necessarily translated to the clinic or into humans because of the stigma that's associated with it. But there is research out there that should be followed up on, and it should be translated to the clinic side. So that's where I came in, having that background in basic research. And understanding that and saying this just needs to be translated one step further, and I couldn't deny it. The research is there. It's been proven over and over again. We have this system in our body, and phytocannabinoids that you get from the cannabis plant can help supplement our systems when we become deficient.
So do you think? I know in lots of other states there's what they call observational trials in states that they have comprehensive medical marijuana programs. So there are actually, in states that there's comprehensive medical marijuana program, there are studies being done. Whether it's observational, there's not a lot of double-blind studies being done on it, but doctors are able to actually set up research and studies around it once the state legalizes the growth, the manufacture and distribution to patients.
Gotcha.
And of course, these aren't FDA-approved studies. However, there is actually one human FDA-approved study. Dr. Sicily with PTSD was actually approved by the FDA for smoking cannabis as a viable option for PTSD victims. And that study is going on right now, and her base is out of Arizona, which again is a legal medical marijuana state. So I do see an opportunity for research to come into the state once this bill passes. And I do see an opportunity, as some of our other guests have spoke about, I'll be your guinea pig. I mean, just let me have access to this because I'm out of options. I think most people come to this when they're out of options. After you learn more and more about it and you see what it does when you have access to it, then you start thinking, we need to come to this before we ran out of options.
Exactly.
Molly, as you know, we are advocating for the whole plant medicine in a tightly regulated program. We hear people say all the time, about the Marinol that's currently available and other isolates and other pharmaceuticals being developed, like the Epidiolex and that type of thing. How would you respond to that from a medical perspective, those medications versus what we're advocating for?
So how I would respond is I would say there's something very, very powerful in being able to have access to the entire plant. Cannabis has over 400 active compounds in it, and all of those compounds were put there within that plant for a reason. There's a theory, it's called the entourage effect, and that the compounds work better and more synergistically when they're together. They buffer each other so you don't have harmful side effects. They make them more effective. They make all of the compounds together make cannabis more effective over a wider dosage range. So with what we have as our pharmaceutical model today, it's single molecule pure compounds, and those can be, that's what opioids are. They're they're very limiting. They work over a smaller dose range. They have very harmful side effects because they don't have the other compounds in there to actually buffer the strength or the power of individual compounds.
And the expense. The expense of them on the state in a lot of cases. A lot of people that are detrimentally ill are on some type of a state assistance program through insurance. And these, when you set up a comprehensive medical marijuana program, it's been proven that people will come off of their pharmaceuticals, they will start using medical cannabis, but all of that is paid out of pocket. So the person pays out of pocket for it, and it's relatively an inexpensive expense considering the pharmaceutical model, so it's affordable for a patient to do. But what they've noticed is that in states that have it, that their Medicaid has actually dropped. The amount of money that people are spending in Medicaid has dropped. Also, in states that have, there was a study done that states that looked at comprehensive medical, there was 12 states they looked at over a 7-year period of time that had a comprehensive medical program, and they found that after 6 years, the opiate deaths decreased by 33%. And we are in an opiate crisis right now. We're in an opiate epidemic. And if we have something that can reduce an opiate deaths by 33% after 6 years, shouldn't we be looking at that as one of the viable options? There's been a lot of talk about how we figure out how to curb this opiate crisis. Well, the data's there.
There are plenty of
doctors
states
need other
that,
options.
Absolutely, there are plenty of states where the data is widely available that they have seen that reduction in over 30% opioid use. And I would just, what more do you need?
Common sense, I guess. That's it. An open mind, common sense.
If you can be helpful to a third of the people that could potentially lose their lives from a pharmaceutical, then why wouldn't you do that with a plant that has never killed anyone? And the reason why is because we don't have those endocannabinoid receptors in our brainstem. Brainstem is where your respiratory, your heart rate and your breathing is controlled in the brain, and the receptors for endocannabinoids are not there. So we can't overdose, we can't kill ourselves because it's impossible. It's impossible.
Absolutely
unless,
impossible.
You suffocated yourself somehow with putting tons of cannabis on
or
yourself.
or
like you we're buried under a plant avalanche or something, but
The plant
you know, taking the
avalanche.
plant itself, using the plant itself, you know, with that type of purpose has never killed anybody. And a good way to think of it too, as far as like this entourage effect, or the whole plant needing all of the compounds and needing the natural compounds, not something synthesized, is I always go back to this with people. Scurvy has never been killed with synthetic, scurvy has never been cured with synthetic vitamin C. You need whole citrus fruit to cure scurvy. That is because
great
there is more
analogy.
than just vitamin C in citrus fruit. There are flavonoids, there are terpenes, there are antioxidants. These are all some of the over 400 active compounds that you find in cannabis too. You need a little bit of all of these plant-based compounds for the plant to work correctly and in a medicinal way. And so I think we need to have access to all of
Absolutely.
it.
I mean, I think one of the things too, Molly, that I always like to tell people is, you know, if you look at, if you get away from Western medicine and you start looking at more plant-based therapies like they do in Asia and countries like that, you can see that their life expectancy is so much longer.
Mm-hmm.
Their health is so much better. They use a lot less pharmaceuticals. So here's a statistic that could probably be shocking to a lot of you. Did you know that the United States consumes 75%, over 75% of the world's pharmaceuticals? The world's pharmaceuticals. That is a shocking statistic. And when you look at other countries and you look at their life expectancy that use plant-based medicines and have gotten away from these synthetic forms and are not using them necessarily like we are, then you see that their quality of life is tremendously better. And so I think that for me, coming to cannabis on that aspect also brought me to other plant-based medicines and dietary issues and things along that line. But I think that this is a starting point for us to start healing our communities, healing our country, really. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Molly.
guys.
Thank you for being here. Absolutely. And thank you guys, and we'll see you
I'm
soon.
gonna run away.
Thank you.
Never see